She found her second chance at love in paradise. Then she discovered her new boyfriend's daughter was the woman who almost destroyed her son. What do you do when your happiness is linked to your family's pain? Don't forget to subscribe, dear, so you don't miss any stories in the future. And I'm very interested to know where you watch me from. Please write in the comments. Now let's begin.
The man whose hand is resting on mine right now, whose warm, kind eyes have made me feel seen and beautiful for the first time in 20 years, is named Arthur. He's 63, a retired history professor with a gentle laugh and a love for jazz that matches my own. For the past 10 days on this glorious, sun-drenched Caribbean cruise, he has been my unexpected, wonderful gift, my second chance. There's just one problem. An hour ago, over cocktails at sunset, he showed me a picture of his estranged daughter. Her name is Cassandra, and I know her by another name, the viper who married my son, bled him dry, and shattered his heart into a million pieces. My new boyfriend, the man I think I might be falling in love with, is the father of the woman who nearly destroyed my son's life. So, you ask, what do I do now? That's the question currently screaming in my head, a frantic panic siren drowning out the gentle lapping of the waves against the ship. Believe me, I'm asking myself the same thing every second. But before I tell you what I'm going to do now, you need to understand how I got here. You need to understand the hell my son went through and the perfect idyllic paradise I thought I had finally found. My story, or rather this chapter of it, began 6 months ago with my son, Kevin. He had just finalized his divorce from Cassandra, a process that had left him financially and emotionally gutted. She was a master manipulator, a woman who had charmed her way into his life and our family, only to execute a cold, calculated plan to drain his business accounts and leave him with a mountain of debt. It took a year of legal battles, with me by his side every step of the way, to untangle her web and get him back on his feet. He was scarred, but he was free. To thank me, he said, for my unwavering support, he'd used his first big commission from his rebuilt graphic design business to buy me this cruise. "Go, Mom," he'd urged, pressing the tickets into my hand. "You deserve it. You've been taking care of everyone else your whole life. Go find some sunshine, find some peace, maybe even find some fun." I was hesitant. At 60, a widow for 10 years, my life was quiet, comfortable. Fun wasn't really part of my vocabulary anymore. But the look in Kevin's eyes, his genuine desire for me to be happy, convinced me. So I packed my bags, and with a heart full of both apprehension and a tiny flicker of excitement, I embarked on my first real vacation in decades. I met Arthur on the second night. There was a live jazz trio playing in the ship's main lounge. I was sitting alone, just enjoying the music, when he approached my table. "Is this seat taken?" he'd asked, his smile warm and genuine. We started talking, and it was easy, effortless. We talked about music, about books, about our lives. He told me he was a widower, a retired history professor from Chicago, traveling to clear his head. I told him I was a retired social worker from Atlanta, celebrating a new chapter. We talked for hours until the lounge was nearly empty. For the next 10 days, we were inseparable. We explored the vibrant markets of Jamaica, walked hand in hand on the white sand beaches of Grand Cayman, and danced under the stars on the ship's deck. With him, I felt young again. Not foolishly young, but vibrant, interesting, desirable. He didn't treat me like a fragile old woman. He treated me like a fascinating, intelligent equal. The connection between us was real, deep, and utterly intoxicating. I was falling for him faster and harder than I ever thought possible at my age. I had finally found peace. I had found fun. I had found Arthur. Which brings me to an hour ago. We were sitting at our favorite spot, the sunset bar on the aft deck, watching the sky blaze with color. We were sharing stories about our children. I spoke of Kevin, of his resilience, his kind heart. Then, with a fond, sad smile, he pulled out his wallet. "I haven't seen my daughter in a few years," he said quietly. "We're estranged. She made some choices I couldn't support, but she's still my little girl." He handed me a worn, creased photograph. I took it, smiling, ready to admire the picture of his daughter. And then the world stopped. Staring back at me from the photograph was a younger but unmistakable Cassandra. The same wide, innocent eyes she used to fool my son, the same perfectly shaped lips, the same calculating intelligence lurking just beneath the surface. It was her, the Viper. I must have made a sound, a choked gasp, because Arthur's expression shifted from fond nostalgia to immediate concern. "Victoria, what is it? Are you all right? Do you know her?" I stared at the photograph, then at his kind, worried face, and the idyllic paradise I had been living in for the past 10 days shattered into a million pieces. The man I was falling for, my second chance at happiness, was inextricably linked to my son's greatest pain, and he had no idea. What do I do now? Do I run? Do I tell him the truth and destroy this beautiful thing we found? Do I stay silent and live a lie, always wondering, always waiting for the other shoe to drop? My fairy tale had just turned into a nightmare, and I was trapped in the middle of it 1,000 miles from home. Time seemed to warp in that moment on the sunset deck. The cheerful calypso music from the ship's speakers faded into a distorted buzz. The vibrant colors of the setting sun turned a sickly gray, and the entire vast Caribbean Sea seemed to shrink to the size of the small, horrifying photograph in my hand. Cassandra. Here. A ghost at my perfect feast. Arthur's concerned face swam before my eyes, his question hanging in the air between us. "Do you know her?" My mind, which had been blissfully adrift for 10 days, suddenly snapped into a state of high alert. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to throw the picture down, to confess everything. But a lifetime of holding my family together, of being the calm center of every storm, took over. I couldn't just implode. I had to think. I forced a small, shaky laugh, a sound that felt utterly alien coming from my own throat. "Oh my," I said, handing the photo back to him, my fingers feeling clumsy, numb. "Forgive me, Arthur. For a second, she looks so much like a girl my son, Kevin, used to know. The resemblance is just startling. It gave me a bit of a turn." It was a weak lie, a flimsy shield, but it was the best I could do. Arthur looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern, but he seemed to accept it. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I didn't mean to startle you." He tucked the photograph back into his wallet, a gesture that felt like he was hiding a weapon. "She has one of those faces, I suppose." I needed to get away. I needed space to breathe, to think, to let the full magnitude of this cosmic cruel joke wash over me. I feigned a sudden headache, blaming it on the sun or the single cocktail I'd had. "Arthur, would you mind terribly if I turned in a bit early tonight? I suddenly feel quite overwhelmed." "Of course not, my dear," he said, his voice full of the gentle kindness that had so completely disarmed me. He walked me to my cabin door, his hand a warm, steady presence on my arm, a touch that now felt both comforting and treacherous. He kissed my cheek, a soft, respectful kiss that now felt like a brand. "I hope you feel better in the morning. I'll miss you at dinner." "I'll miss you too," I lied, and closed the door, leaning against it as if to hold back the world. Alone in the sterile silence of my cabin, the facade crumbled. I sank onto the bed, my body shaking, my mind a chaotic whirlwind. Cassandra, his daughter, Arthur's daughter. The father of the Viper was this kind, intelligent, gentle man I was falling for? How was that possible? I replayed his words in my head. We're estranged. She made some choices I couldn't support. What choices? The choice to marry a good man and systematically destroy his finances and his spirit? The choice to be a manipulative, soulless predator? It had to be. This wasn't just a casual disagreement between a father and daughter. This was an estrangement deep enough for him to carry her picture with a look of profound sadness. He knew. He must have known. At least some part of what she was. My dilemma was a three-headed monster. First, there was my son, Kevin. He was finally healing. He'd sent me on this cruise to find peace, to escape the shadow of Cassandra. What would he think if he knew I was here, falling for her father? He would see it as a betrayal, a terrible, unforgivable disloyalty. The thought of causing him more pain was unbearable. Second, there was Arthur. If I told him the truth, your estranged daughter is the woman who nearly destroyed my son's life, what would happen? This fragile, beautiful connection we were building would shatter instantly. He would be forced to choose a side or retreat into his own world of pain and family drama. I would lose him. The thought of losing this unexpected second chance of happiness was a new and terrible grief. Third, there was the lie. If I said nothing, every moment with him would be tainted. Every shared smile, every conversation, every touch would be built on a massive, glaring omission. I would be constantly on guard, terrified of a stray word, a slip of the tongue that would bring the whole house of cards crashing down. How could a real relationship, the kind I was beginning to hope for, be built on such a rotten foundation? I paced the small cabin like a caged animal. The cruise, my symbol of freedom and healing, had become a gilded prison, and I was trapped with my impossible choice. For hours, I went back and forth. Tell him, don't tell him, run, stay, end it now, see where it goes. By the time the first light of dawn crept through my porthole, I had made a decision. Or, rather, I had decided that I couldn't make a decision without more information. I was operating on a single, shocking data point. I didn't have the full picture. Arthur had said he was estranged from her, that he didn't support her choices. What did that mean? How much did he know about what she'd done to Kevin? Was he an innocent, heartbroken father, or was he somehow complicit, an enabler of her behavior? I remembered the vague way she had sometimes spoken of her difficult relationship with her father, painting him as controlling and unsupportive, a narrative I now saw deeply suspect. I couldn't condemn Arthur or our relationship based on the sins of his daughter, but I couldn't move forward without understanding his role, if any, in her life. My course was clear, though terrifying. I had to stay. I had to continue seeing him, but our idyllic romance was over. In its place was a quiet, tense, one-woman investigation. I had to learn everything I could about his relationship with Cassandra, about the choices she'd made that he couldn't support. I had to become a detective, probing gently for information, listening for clues, all while pretending to be the carefree, enamored woman he thought I was. My second chance at love had just become a high-stakes intelligence mission, and I had no idea if my heart would survive it. The next morning, I put on my bravest face, a serene smile that felt like a cheap theatrical mask, and met Arthur for breakfast. He looked relieved to see me, his kind eyes searching mine for any lingering trace of my previous night's overwhelm. "Feeling better, my dear?" he asked, his hand covering mine on the tablecloth for a brief, warm moment. "Much better, thank you," I lied, my heart doing a nervous flutter kick against my ribs. A good night's sleep was all I needed. Our idyllic romance resumed, but now it had a sinister undercurrent, at least for me. Every easy laugh, every shared glance was now freighted with my terrible secret. I felt like a spy in the house of love, and my mission was to learn everything I could about the enemy's father, who was, impossibly, becoming the man I was falling for. I began my gentle interrogation over the next few days, during our strolls on the deck, during quiet dinners. I had to be careful to make my questions seem like the natural curiosity of a new lover, not a cross-examination. "You mentioned your daughter," I started one afternoon as we watched the turquoise water slide by. "It must be so difficult being estranged from your only child." He sighed, a deep, heavy sound, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's the great sadness of my life, Victoria. I love her. Of course I do. But I don't like the person she has become." "What person is that?" I asked softly, my heart pounding. He was hesitant at first, but then, as if a dam had broken, he began to talk. He spoke of Cassandra's childhood after her mother passed away, how he had spoiled her, given her everything, perhaps out of his own guilt and grief. He spoke of her growing sense of entitlement, her belief that the world owed her a life of luxury without effort. She's a user, Victoria," he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "She's beautiful, she's charming, and she knows how to find people's weaknesses and exploit them. She sees people not as human beings, but as resources, stepping stones." Every word was a confirmation of what my son, Kevin, had experienced. Every sentence was a small, sharp validation of the truth I knew. "The final break came about 2 years ago," he continued, his voice low. "She was involved with a young man, a good boy from a decent family, an architect, I believe. She ruined him, convinced him to invest his life savings into one of her sham art ventures, bled him dry, and then discarded him like a piece of trash when the money ran out. When I found out, I confronted her. I told her I would not stand by and watch her destroy people. I cut her off financially, completely. I told her she was no longer welcome in my life until she sought real, professional help for her sickness of the soul." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, profound pain. "She laughed in my face, called me a naive old fool, and I haven't spoken to her since." I sat there, stunned into silence. He knew. He didn't know it was my son, my Kevin, but he knew what she was. He wasn't her enabler. He was her first, and perhaps most heartbroken victim. The relief that washed over me was so immense it almost made me weep. He was a good man, a man of principle, a man who had stood up to his own daughter for what was right. But my relief was immediately followed by an even more agonizing dilemma. The barrier to our relationship wasn't his character. It was the impossible, tragic coincidence of our lives. How could I ever bring this good, decent man home to meet my son? How could Kevin ever look at the father of the woman who had destroyed him and see anything but her shadow? Our cruise was ending. We had 2 days left. The idyllic paradise had become a pressure cooker of unspoken truths and impossible choices. That night at dinner, Arthur took my hand. "Victoria," he said, his voice serious, "this has been the most wonderful, unexpected 10 days of my life. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy, but I'm falling in love with you. I don't want this to be a cruise ship romance. When we get back to the States, I want to see you. I want to build a life with you." His words were everything I had secretly hoped to hear and everything I had dreaded.
I looked into his kind, hopeful eyes, and I knew my time for quiet investigation was over. I couldn't build a life with this good, decent man on a foundation of lies. He deserved the truth, and so did I. "Arthur," I said, my voice trembling, "there's something I have to tell you about your daughter, Cassandra, and about the good young man, the architect that she ruined." His brow furrowed in confusion. "How could you possibly know about that?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, ready to detonate the bomb that would either fuse our lives together in a crucible of shared experience or shatter them both forever. I said, meeting his gaze, my own eyes filling with tears, that young man is my son."
The silence that followed my confession was a living thing, a universe of shock and horror expanding between us in the space of a few heartbeats. Arthur stared at me, his face pale, the look of hopeful love that had been there just moments before draining away, replaced by a stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. The cheerful sounds of the ship, the distant music, the chatter of other passengers seemed to warp and fade, leaving us in a cold, isolated bubble of our own making. He looked from my tear-filled eyes down to his hands, then back up, as if hoping my face had changed, that he had misheard me. "Your son?" he finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper, almost unrecognizable. "Your son, Kevin, was the architect? The one Cassandra—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I just nodded, a fresh wave of tears blurring my vision. "Yes, Arthur, my Kevin." He slumped back in his chair, a shudder running through his body. He looked like a man who had been physically struck. "Oh my God," he breathed, running a hand over his face. "Oh my dear God, Victoria, I am so sorry." There was no doubt in his voice, no questioning, only a profound, immediate, and devastating wave of shame and sorrow. Shame for his daughter's actions and sorrow for the pain it had inflicted on the son of the woman he was now looking at with heartbroken eyes. That was the moment I knew this wasn't over between us. If he had shown even a flicker of defensiveness, a hint of there must be two sides to every story, my own pain and protective instincts would have slammed the door on whatever we had. But his reaction was one of pure, unadulterated empathy. He was not his daughter's apologist. He was another one of her victims. We didn't stay at the Sunset Bar. We couldn't. We walked, in a daze, to a quiet, deserted part of the upper deck, the salty wind whipping around us, a welcome, bracing shock to our shattered senses. And we talked. For hours. I told him everything, not just the financial ruin Cassandra had wrought upon Kevin, but the emotional destruction. I described my son's vacant eyes, his loss of confidence, the months it took him to even want to pick up a pencil and sketch again. I told Arthur about the web of lies she had spun, the way she had isolated Kevin, the casual cruelty of her final dismissal. It was like lancing a wound, pouring out all the poison I had held inside for so long. And he listened. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his face etched with a pain that mirrored my own. And then he told me his side. He told me about Cassandra's long history of manipulation, her lack of empathy, her insatiable need for admiration and money. He told me about other men, other investments, other broken hearts she had left in her wake. He told me about the final terrible argument they had, the one that led to their estrangement, where he had finally refused to fund her lifestyle any longer, and she had told him he was a weak, sentimental old fool and that she wished he were dead. As we shared our stories, a strange and powerful thing happened. The chasm, opened by the shock of my revelation, began to close.
We were no longer just two people on a cruise ship enjoying a late-life romance. We were two survivors, two parents who had been hurt by the same person, who understood each other's pain on a level no one else could. Our fledgling love, I realized, was now forged in a crucible of shared sorrow and a shared understanding of the same destructive force. It was deeper, more complex, and infinitely stronger than the simple, happy connection we'd had before. But it was also infinitely more complicated. "What do we do, Victoria?" he asked as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, our last day on the ship. I am falling in love with you. I believe that. But how can this possibly work? Your son, my daughter? That was the impossible question. "I don't know, Arthur," I answered honestly, my heart aching. "Kevin, he's finally healing. This news, the knowledge that his mother is dating the father of the woman who nearly destroyed him, I'm afraid it would set him back, undo all his progress. It would feel like a betrayal to him, and I would never ask you to do that to him. Never." We spent our last day on the ship in a state of quiet, bittersweet intimacy. The easy laughter was gone, replaced by a deeper, more thoughtful connection. We held hands, we talked, we tried to solve the unsolvable puzzle of our lives. We knew what we wanted. We wanted a future together. But the ghost of Cassandra stood between us, a formidable barrier built of our love and loyalty to our respective children. By the time the ship docked back in Miami, we had come to a difficult, painful decision. We would not try to see each other immediately. We would go back to our separate lives, but we would stay in touch. We would write, we would call, and we would give it time. Time for me to figure out if there was ever a right moment, a right way to tell Kevin the truth, and time for him to see if this connection we felt was strong enough to withstand the enormous, complicated reality of our lives. Saying goodbye to him at the airport was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It felt like walking away from a warm, sunlit room and back into a cold, gray world. The romance, the fairy tale, was over. And now, the real, difficult work began. I had answered the question of what do I do now on the ship. I had told him the truth. But now, a new, even harder question loomed. What do we do next? And was there any path forward that didn't lead to more heartbreak? The months following the cruise were a strange sort of purgatory. I was home, back in the comforting rhythm of my quiet life in Atlanta, but my heart was somewhere in Chicago with Arthur. We kept our promise. We spoke on the phone every night, our conversations a lifeline across the miles. We sent each other long, thoughtful emails, sharing details of our days, our thoughts, our histories. Our connection deepened, paradoxically, in our separation. We were building an intimacy of minds and souls, even as we were starved of physical presence. But it was a love affair conducted in whispers, shrouded in secrecy. Every time the phone rang and it was him, I'd feel a jolt of both joy and guilt. I'd find myself closing doors, lowering my voice, hiding the smile on my face when my son, Kevin, was around. I, who had always valued honesty above all else, was living a lie, and it was eating me alive. Kevin was doing so well. His healing had been slow but steady. He was excelling in his job, his confidence returning. He was even starting to date again, cautiously, but with an open heart. He was happy, and seeing him happy was all I'd ever wanted. How could I risk that? How could I introduce a new potential source of pain, one so bizarrely and cruelly linked to his old one? The question, what do I do now, had become a constant, agonizing hum beneath the surface of my days.
The catalyst came, as it often does, when I least expected it. Kevin had come over for our usual Sunday dinner. He seemed happier than I'd seen him in years, telling me about a new woman he'd met, a kind, down-to-earth landscape architect named Sarah. "She's wonderful, Mom," he said, his eyes shining. "She's normal, honest. After Cassandra, I didn't know if I could ever trust anyone again. But with Sarah, it feels easy." My heart swelled with happiness for him, but also with a sharp, stabbing pain of my own hypocrisy. I was so proud of him for finding his way back to trust while I was hiding this monumental secret from him. Later that evening, as I was clearing the dishes, my phone rang. It was Arthur. I saw his name on the screen, and my heart did its familiar leap. I quickly silenced the call, intending to call him back later. But Kevin had seen my face. "Who was that, Mom?" he asked, casually. "Oh, just a friend from my church group," I lied, the words tasting like ash. He looked at me, his gaze quiet, perceptive. The wounded boy was gone, replaced by a thoughtful man. "You've been getting a lot of calls from that friend lately, and you get this little smile on your face when you talk to him. Mom, are you seeing someone?" There was no accusation in his voice, only genuine, loving curiosity. And in that moment, I knew the charade was over. I couldn't lie to this new, healed version of my son. He deserved the same honesty he was now so bravely embracing in his own life. I took a deep breath. "Yes, baby," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Yes, I am. His name is Arthur, and we need to talk." We sat in the living room, and I told him everything. I told him about the lonely woman who'd gone on a cruise, not expecting anything. I told him about meeting a kind, wonderful man, a retired professor who loved jazz and made me laugh. I described their 10 perfect days, the feeling of finding a second chance at love when I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. Kevin listened, a warm, happy smile spreading across his face. That's wonderful, Mom," he said, his eyes shining. That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. You deserve this. You deserve all the happiness in the world." And then, my heart pounding, I told him the rest. I told him about the photograph, about the name of Arthur's estranged daughter. I told him it was Cassandra. I watched his face, braced for the shock, the anger, the inevitable pain. I saw it all flash across his features. Disbelief, then a flicker of old hurt, then a deep, profound confusion. He was silent for a long, long time, just staring at his hands. So the man you're falling in love with," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "is her father?" "Yes," I whispered, tears now streaming down my face. "I know it's impossible. I know it's crazy. I ended it, Kevin. I told him we couldn't because of you. I would never, ever do anything to hurt you again." He looked up at me then, and his eyes were not full of anger, but of a deep, sad wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. He saw not a betrayal, but the impossible, heartbreaking dilemma of his mother. "So, you found something wonderful, and you were going to give it up. For me? Because of her?" I just nodded, unable to speak. He was quiet for another long moment. Then he reached out and took my hand. His grip was firm, steady. "No, Mom," he said, his voice full of a strength I had never heard before. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to sacrifice your happiness because of a shadow she cast on my wife. Her poison is not going to touch you too. Not anymore." He stood up, pulling me into a hug. "Is he a good man, Mom?" "He is, Kevin." I sobbed into his shoulder. "He's a wonderful man. And does he make you happy?" "More than I ever thought I could be again," I admitted. He pulled back, his hands on my shoulders, and looked me straight in the eye. "Then that's all that matters. His daughter is his tragedy. He is not responsible for her sins, just as I am not responsible for my pain. You taught me how to heal, Mom. Now you have to let yourself be happy. That night, with Kevin's blessing, a blessing I never thought I would receive, I called Arthur. "There's someone here who wants to talk to you," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I passed the phone to my son. I watched as Kevin spoke to the father of the woman who had destroyed him, his conversation quiet, mature, and full of a grace I could only marvel at. They spoke for a long time. They spoke of their shared, if different pain caused by the same person. They spoke of history and jazz and second chances. A week later, Arthur flew to Atlanta. I introduced him to Kevin, and I watched as these two good men, bound by a terrible history, chose to build a new future based on mutual respect and their shared love for me. My story, my confession, which began with the question, "What do I do now?" had found its answer. You choose love. You choose honesty. You choose to believe in healing, not just for your children, but for yourself. Our family is unconventional now. A strange, beautiful tapestry woven from threads of pain and resilience, loss, and unexpected love. But it's our family. And I, Victoria, a woman who thought her life was over, am standing in the bright, warm sunshine of a new beginning, my hand held securely by a good man, my heart full, at long last, at peace.